I'm Strategy Director at Complete College America, and it's my pleasure to welcome Pamela Burdman and Melodie Baker. And I will let introduce them themselves in a second, but just give you a very brief overview of Just Equations. It's an organization that works to ensure that policies are implemented to reverse inequities that exist in math education at all levels in order to provide a good math foundation for students and ultimately to remove barriers that stifle college completion. So much like CCA, to conduct research and analysis, synthesize that work in a way that is digestible, host gatherings with various stakeholders, and provide expert advice to implement more equitable educational policies. So with this, I yield the floor to our two presenters today. And again, please feel free, and I encourage you to use the chat and the Q&A feature. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Nicholas. And I especially like to thank CCA, Complete College America, for giving us the opportunity to share our work and to do this presentation on post-secondary math pathways and equity lens. I'm the National Policy Director for Just Equations, and I will hand it over to our Executive Director so that she can introduce herself.
Hi there, I'm Pam Burdman, Executive Director of Just Equations, which I see some familiar names out there, but if you don't know us, we're about a 3-year-old organization, and we were founded really to focus on reconceptualizing the role of math in education equity, especially in the pathways from high school to and through college. Back to you, Melodie.
Thank you. So we're here today because for too long, math policies and college admissions practices have created barriers to access to post-secondary opportunities for Black, Latinx, and economically disadvantaged students. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, college attainment and student success rates have only become worse. So today, Pam and I are here to discuss post-secondary strategies that remove barriers instead of create them. Pam will begin by highlighting how and why math is an equity issue. And then I'll share what's being done about it at the post-secondary level. And then we'll discuss challenges and opportunities. Please feel free to post any questions you have in the chat, and we'll answer them during the Q&A section of our presentation. But before I jump in, I'd like to conduct a poll to see who's attending. You'll see a poll pop up in the screen. There we go. And please just select if you're an administrator, an executive, in executive leadership, faculty member, advising student affairs, the CEO office, or systems office. And then as soon as everyone's finished, I will do the results. We'll just give it a few more seconds to show the results. There we go. So it looks like about 29% of the people here are in administration. We've got about 12% people here in executive leadership. 26 people are faculty members, 24% advising student affairs, only a couple of people in the CEO office, and 7% in systems. So it looks like we have today with us administration, faculty members, and advising students. So we are happy to have you. I will go ahead and pass it over to Pam to kick us off.
Okay, so Just Equations has what we call a mathematics of opportunity framework in which we unpack why math is an equity issue and how inequity in math operates. And that came out a few years ago, but here's what we observed. There's something we call the prevailing architecture of math opportunity that has these 3 interrelated components. It begins with the foundation of misconceptions about what it means to do math and who can do it. And you may be familiar that there are a lot of assumptions that math ability is something that's innate versus learned, that you're a math person or you're not, or that processing speed and the ability to do math quickly is like all that counts in mathematics, which is not the case. We know that mathematicians in particular are known for doing math deeply and slowly, not necessarily quickly and efficiently. So these misconceptions are at the root of this. And then secondly, there are many existing inequities: poorly resourced schools, lack of access to qualified teachers, not to mention bias and stereotype threat that and the corrosive effects of them. And they sort of scaffold this architecture further. And then lastly, we call what we call the use of math as pedigree sort of reinforces this architecture. The way we've historically used math to confer privilege and as a gatekeeper to determine who has access to educational attainment, even when the math skills in question may not be valid prerequisites. And it's in particular when it's not valid that we question the gatekeeping, obviously. And then by the time students are in college, these gaps have had a chance to widen and widen over time. Those with benefits get more and more, and those who lack them often fall farther behind. So that's why these patterns have a particularly pernicious effect on college access and success. And we know and we can acknowledge that change in this needs to begin in K-12, and I'm sure some of you are working on that. But today we're here to focus on the role of post-secondary education in addressing these changes, which really requires a comprehensive approach addressing numerous aspects of math equity. What we call the 4 equity dimensions of math education, which begins with math content. What math we teach, how we teach it, and how we teach it, which is instruction, and then how we measure students' learning. All these pieces, and then they interact to both determine and be determined by our various readiness policies and structures. So in rethinking this, we need to address all these components. The content of math pathways, because we know research has demonstrated that the traditional pathway to calculus serves few students well. And if people have questions about that, we can discuss that more later in the Q&A about some of that research. But we can see with a focus on equity that the traditional pathway has at least 2 problems. First of all, it pressures students to accelerate in mathematics early on, as early as middle school or high school. And that contributes to tracking, results in students often being filtered out of STEM opportunities, particularly students of color. But it also serves as a hurdle that blocks students with other interests from pursuing their college or career ambitions. Instruction is also critical. We often hear about 2 types of classroom characteristics. I'm going to have 2 columns here, A and B. So which one of those sounds like it's describing a math classroom, perhaps the math classroom that you experienced? We're not going to discuss it now, but just answer for yourself. I suspect many of you picked column A because traditional math classrooms really do tend to emphasize the characteristics in column A, whereas most students learn better in more of a column B experience. And that's what a lot of the math pedagogy is going now. Also key is how we measure student learning. Our frequent emphasis on standardized assessments and high stakes time tests is really problematic, especially given the disparate impact of those tests. And we know from research on college placement exams that the tests have a limited predictive value and that they were responsible for many students being underplaced into remedial courses that they may not have needed. There's similar issues involving college admissions tests. Lastly, math, for many of the reasons I just described, plays a role in numerous policies and structures that really determine students' readiness for high school courses, ability to graduate from high school or to be admitted and succeed in college, as well as being placed into college level courses. These policies really set the context and conditions in which the practices of content instruction and assessment can be adopted and implemented. And they can also serve to constrain innovation. And importantly, if these policies between high school and post-secondary are misaligned, additional equities may result. So that's sort of an overview of these 4 dimensions and why math is such an equity issue. And I'm leaving it to Melodie to talk more about the strategies we see playing out in post-secondary education to address some of these concerns.
Thanks, Pam. So imagine being a real estate agent and being presented with a new client. You being the researcher that you are, you know that the average person spends about $250,000 in a house. The desired location is in a metropolitan city, something like Austin, Texas, or perhaps in a diverse community like Portland, Oregon. And of course, everyone wants walkable neighborhoods. And people are typically looking for a minimum of 3 bedrooms in the event that they decide to expand their families or if they want to have a guest. And of course, you cannot forget enough space for a pet. You bring all these options together and you put together a portfolio for your client. You cite the average market research, and you even include homes that have a doggy doorway. You meet with your client to present the options, only to learn that they are dairy farmers. They have 6 children, 12 chickens, 26 cows, and need no less than 110 acres to accommodate them. They also need enough living space for their 3 dogs and their pet pig. Needless to say that the doggy door won't work. Now, I know that that sounds like a silly example and it might be far-fetched. I actually am from a rural community, and my extended families have farms, so it's really not that far-fetched. But that's exactly what we do every time we take an average one-size-fit-all approach to select, assess, and place students using math as a filter. So similar to finding the right type of home for a dairy farmer, we need to find the right math pathway for students, centering education around the individual opposed to the standard, average, or archaic inequitable practice. So research has proven that 100% of applicants are people. Research has proven that 100% of future non-STEM and STEM majors, artists, engineers, they're people. And of course, research has proven that 100% of students, whether they're Black, economically disadvantaged, white, they're all people. So if we are not in the business of people, we're in the wrong business. That's why we need a new architecture of math opportunity, centering these 4 dimensions: content, instruction, assessment, and policy around the student. So I'm going to spend the rest of my presentation providing examples from states that have implemented these 4 dimensions to create a new architecture of opportunity, using strategies rooted around the student and not a dated standard of the past. So we all know that content reform is not easy. You have to realize that you're attempting to undo over 50 years of structured practices, policies, and faculty-determined norms. Math pathways require major changes to developmental and college-level math courses. The majority of states have adopted math pathways in some form. Some states require it, and some states simply allow colleges and universities to adopt them. Though the choice of pathways can vary, the most common 3 are statistics, quantitative reasoning, and the STEM pathway to calculus. Other pathways adopted by states include mathematics modeling, math for teachers, business math, data science, personal finance. So the data center has recommended that states choose between 3 and 7 pathways. But what's most important is that the pathway aligns with student academic and career goals. So at this time, we'll launch a poll to find out if your state system is using diversified pathways. We want to know, have you been implementing math pathways for several years now? Have you recently began implementing math pathways? Is your state or college system thinking about implementing math pathways or diversified math pathways, or are you still using traditional math pathways? So if you could just fill that out, and once everyone is done, we'll give you a few seconds. We'll give you about 10 more seconds. We will show the results. Okay, wow. It looks like about 35% of the people attending have been implementing math pathways for several years now. That's great. We've got another 29% have begun recently implementing math pathways. We have 21% who are thinking about implementing diversified math pathways, and about 15% of the people here are still using traditional math pathways. That's very interesting to know. Thank you. So instructional reforms must be put in place to create an equitable system. Here are the 5 guiding principles that must be considered. Number 1, math educators need critical consciousness. 2, math curriculum should reflect a more expansive view of mathematics, including the history of mathematical concepts, the uses of math in different cultures, and the application of math for understanding current events. Math curriculum and instruction should be adaptable so that it is relevant to the specific student in the class. Number 4, math curriculum and instruction should feature meaningful opportunities to engage in collaborative work. And last but not least, assessment practices and policies should prioritize deep mathematical thinking, exploration, and collaboration. During our recent convening, we had a young lady talk about her math experiences. And she said during elementary and middle school, she had several challenges and struggled understanding the work. She took a data science class, and they used different things that they did on a daily basis, the snacks that they ate, but they used meaningful experiences to help her understand what the work was that she was doing. And she said it made a big difference. So next, we're going to talk about assessment and placement reforms. Policies and practices and sometimes laws need to change at the institution and state level. 2 strategies are multiple measures placement and co-requisite approaches. The most recent survey from the Center for Analysis of Post-Secondary Readiness in 2016 said that more than half of colleges were using multiple measures placement. By now, probably many more are. They have grown dramatically over the past decade. So here are 2 examples of policy reforms, admissions policy reforms. Recently, the University of California system expanded its courses that meet math requirements for admissions to include courses such as data science, computer science, and discrete math. High school students in their 3rd and/or 4th year can now choose to take quantitative reasoning courses instead of the traditional algebra math sequence. Another example of policy reform is from New York. A report linked the decreasing number of New York City students of color gaining admissions to CUNY's 4-year programs to CUNY's strict reliance on cutoff scores on college entrance exams and GPA for admissions. So CUNY piloted a program that admitted students who scored below the SAT cutoff scores. And they used multiple measures or performance-based assessments like essays, presentations, and letters of recommendations from teachers to accept students. They found that the pilot cohort had higher first semester GPAs than their peers from New York City public schools. And they had a higher likelihood of earning at least 80% of their first semester attempted credits. States are also reforming their policy with respect to remediation. In California, a recent law, AB 705, requires that community colleges maximize the probability that a student will enter and complete college-level coursework within 1 year. So that means not placing students, not placing the majority of students into remedial courses, because evidence shows that these courses decrease the chances that students will complete their sequence. So AB 705 has made a big difference. In 2019, 78% of first-time math students took college-level math, which is statistics, pre-calculus, and others, versus only 21% had access to college-level math than in 2015. So roughly 31,000 more students completed college-level math than in 2015. I'm going to add this link to the chat so everyone can see it. All right, there we go. Hopefully everyone got that. Okay. But there are some challenges. Some colleges have kept remedial courses and students get the impression that they're supposed to take them. This is more common at colleges with higher proportions of students of color. And we need to do a better job of understanding how equitably students are able to access STEM options. So now we'd like to hear from you. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Pam, so that we can start a discussion question. Please remember, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll answer them during our Q&A at the end.
And what we'd like to start with, though, is we'd like to hear from you, since we know that something around almost 2/3 of your states have been implementing math pathways, and many of the others are considering it. We'd like to hear from you what you see as the challenges in your state or system with implementing math pathways. Nothing yet. We'll give you people are probably typing. We will give another, I don't know, 30 seconds here. Preparedness.
Exactly.
Okay, I was wondering on the preparedness if that was preparedness of students or of the institution. We see students are coming in unprepared. Getting by it, yeah. Okay. Sufficient enrollment numbers, competitive admissions. Hi, Bill. Agreements between 2-year and 4-year. So I'm going to try to summarize these a little bit. There are concerns that students are underprepared. There are concerns about getting buy-in at all levels. And in particular, now we didn't talk about high schools because our focus today is on post-secondary, but there is definitely a concern being pointed to here about high schools preparing students on a STEM pathway and thinking they need to have calculus. I'm thinking this means have calculus in high school. Okay, then there's faculty resistance. I'm guessing this is math faculty, but not, yeah, and another one about faculty and admission administrators clashing. Political climate. Okay, university buy-in, that was an issue we had in California, and we can maybe talk about that at some point if folks would like, because in California, our community colleges adopted math pathways initially, but they weren't accepted for transfer by the 4-year institutions, some of whom I see are actually on this call. and another issue about competitive admissions, which really goes to the challenges of having math pathways in high school, which I think, well, I know Bill. I know he's referring to, we talked about the University of California system has opened up, as Melodie mentioned, access to admission for students who take courses, say, other than Algebra 2 or pre-calculus, which is a positive thing, but there's a very real concern that students could be overlooked for admission if they don't have the more traditional courses on their, on their plate, so to speak. Melodie, do you want to highlight any of these? I haven't gone through all of them yet.
Yes, I saw some really good ones. One, when many students are many years out of school, some math remediation is often essential. If it is quote unquote easy to take basic math for liberal arts or stat classes, are we cutting students off from STEM pathways by creating a different type of tracking? So I thought that one was interesting.
I can say that is a major concern we have, and we think that doesn't necessarily have to be the case with math pathways, but it is a risk. And we are actually looking into and doing some research to understand how different colleges implement their math pathways, to understand how they can be implemented in ways that do not track, for example, track students of color out of STEM pathways. There is definitely a risk. The other concern we have is that students who are undecided about their majors will just be defaulted into statistics and then be shut off from the option of or have it not completely shut off, but it would be much harder for them to then change their mind and decide to go into STEM because they hadn't taken the math that's required for the STEM pathways. So we do think we need to have a lot more thinking and understanding about how to do that well. And there are examples of colleges that have shown evidence that they've improved the rates of students of color who are in STEM fields. So that's what we're looking into. Others, Melodie?
Yes, and then one of the things I wanted to add to that was about students who had been out of college for quite some time and needing some remediation. Prior to our call, we were talking with Nicholas from CCA, from Complete College America, about co-requisite classes, which really work to address the students' basic needs and at the same time provide them course credit. So yes, some students, I think we do agree, some students do need additional support. However, that's where those co-requisite courses come in. And the second part of that question is whether or not that cuts students off from STEM pathways. So that's the main idea. If students who are interested in the STEM pathway, they get access to a co-requisite pathway or co-requisite course that can put them on that pathway, it really truly creates more opportunities and more access for more folks to participate. So hopefully we answered that question. And then there were a few.
Can I add one thing, Melodie? We also advocate that there need to be bridge courses so that a student who does decide, the only reason or the main reason it's difficult to switch from, say, a non-STEM to a STEM pathway is because of policies that say so. At some institutions, it's like once you've taken past your math, you can't go back and do your math again. So there are policies that could be changed. And we think that there need to be bridges, and actually a co-requisite, as Melodie was, I think, mentioning, can serve as a bridge for a student who needs brushing up in STEM because they've decided that's really where their passion is.
Wow, yes. Thanks for adding. So there's a few other questions in here, or a few other answers on, what the challenges are in place. And this one I thought was interesting. reworking algebra sequence is being done without including other departments. Pam, do you have any suggestions or recommendations on how departments can work together to make the sequence make sense for everyone?
Well, I can certainly say that, I'm not a math professor, so I can certainly say that it is important for the math departments to work with other disciplines. And there certainly are some models coming out from the MAA, for example. Mathematics Association of America has done some studies showing how they work with client disciplines. There's a few reports. I don't have them at the tip of my fingers right now, but we could certainly share them with Nicholas. That might be useful models for how it's been done with, the traditional courses, the sort of college algebra, pre-calculus, calculus courses, and how they look to address the needs of what they call client disciplines. But I think that's the correct mentality. And there's certainly some other statements and reports from major math associations that also advocate doing that. If any of that's helpful, we can share it with the CCA folks as resources.
Sounds good. There's an interesting comment here from Karen Ball. She said, I teach I teach at a 4-year liberal arts college. I've been struck by the number of students who enter the stats pathway with co-requisite support and thrive and actually find out that they're good at math. Unfortunately, they still write their success off as luck. I would love to find a bridge from the stats class to pre-calculus. I'm working on it, but I think it's good to think of those bridges past the first year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any comments, Pam?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was suggesting. Yeah. Same, that those bridge classes need to be allowed. Yeah.
There's another question on here about what to be used as multiple measures. I'm assuming that's associated with the admissions process and how colleges are looking, or what measures they're looking to admit students. That's one of the examples that I captured. Actually, LPI, they do a lot with performance-based assessment in using more than just SAT cutoff scores and more than GPAs to assess a student. That example that I gave earlier was quite interesting because many of those students who would have typically not been accepted in the program, they ended up thriving. However, they did turn in a variety of measures to demonstrate their capabilities. So these students did presentations, they got recommendations, they wrote essays. But LPI does a great job of demonstrating what types of measures can be used for the admissions process. Do you have anything, Pam?
I don't really have anything to add on that. I would, yeah. But I see another, wait, I lost a question from Eric. I'm not sure of Eric's last name, about how do we convince teachers, counselors, and others that the alternative pathways are just as rigorous as the algebra STEM pathway. So I'm not sure if that question is referring, because it says teachers. I don't know if Eric is referring to high schools, or Eric, feel free to tell us in the chat if you're out there. But I don't know if he was asking about high schools or colleges. College is slightly easier. Is that a message from Eric? No. College is slightly easier in that it should be focused on what a student's major is. I think that although we do know of instances where students change majors because they become discouraged with their experiences in the math pathway, they change out of a STEM major for that reason. So although we say that the major that the math pathway should follow the major. We do know of cases documented in the, literature where the major follows the math pathway. Someone, has a bad experience or discouraging experience in calculus, even if they get a good grade, and this is more common for women, they feel discouraged. And the women are more likely to be women of color, students of color as well. They feel discouraged and then they switch their majors. So that's an issue. But if Eric was asking about high school, we still haven't heard back from Eric. So I'm just going to say, if Eric was asking about high school, this is a somewhat different question. How do we convince them that they're just as rigorous? Well, first of all, we have to ensure that they're just as rigorous. Obviously, they're not just as rigorous because we say so, but we have to create pathways that actually are rigorous. And we have to reconsider our definition of rigor, because a lot of times the definition of rigor in math has been how much algebra it has, and abstract manipulation. If we're using that definition of rigor, it will be hard to convince anyone. But we talked to Ricardo Moena, who spoke at our conference a couple weeks ago, of Ohio, and he talks about rigor as being the level of complexity, the ability to solve problems, and also to communicate about the problem solving. And so there are other definitions. So that's a starting point. But I think with teachers and counselors, we tend to think that that admissions policy is really key. So if admissions policies from the four-year institutions in a state are requiring, the calculus or traditional STEM pathway, then it would probably be not reasonable to try to convince teachers and counselors to place students in these pathways, because it could close their opportunities. So we're increasingly having conversations, and I know states who were maybe on this call are doing that as well. Certainly California and Ohio, I know, have been doing so, and I'd be curious if other states are looking at this question as well. Feel free to let us know in the chat.
Pam, there's another question here that I saw to be pretty interesting. Bill Vasey said the financial pressures on, yes, the financial pressures on state funding behind graduating in four-year efforts encourage students to stay in your own lane, and moving into STEM from a non-STEM background needs to be accomplished fairly and efficiently. That's a really good point.
It's a very good point. And that really needs to be addressed. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left for questions. We've got a lot of questions and comments in here. Yeah, a comment about Uri Treisman looking at students going from intro to stats to pre-calculus or calculus. We think that can be done. Does Math Pathways recommend removing calculus from associate degrees in engineering and technology? It seems that there is some advocacy in that direction. Also, how much the Math Pathways deviate from the traditional sequence for engineering and technology disciplines? So these are good questions, and I think it's important to note that there's not like one math path, one sort of monolithic Math Pathways Bible or anything like that. Much of this work has happened, and some of the folks who are on this in this meeting have been involved. It's happened at state levels. Often states have a math task force comprised of math faculty from 2-year and 4-year institutions. And ideally, as we said, they would be talking with their colleagues in various disciplines to determine what math is needed by the various disciplines, and how to design those pathways. And if anyone who has done that wants to make a comment about that in the chat, feel free. I do not know if pathways will be reflected in AP Scholar recommendations, but again, I would say, as we were saying with admissions, the more that these sort of gatekeeping entities recognize the math pathways, the more legitimacy they will have, and the more teachers and counselors could feel comfortable with referring students to them. So I know we have a few closing comments. Melodie, should we go to those? I think we're down to about 2 minutes here.
Yes, I think we should.
Okay.
I'm just going to put this in the chat. Okay, so recent college and career readiness and the CCRC report that Pam mentioned a little bit earlier noted that many of the post-secondary math reforms had not been intentional about implementing strategies that target equity. And they highlighted these 4 areas. Pam's recent op-ed examined this issue, noting that of the 4 dimensions we highlighted today, instructional strategies in particular may be getting short shrift in favor of structural and curricular changes. And that could prevent post-secondary math reforms from successfully addressing inequity. I added a link to the chat so you all can see that, Improving Developmental College Level Mathematics. We'd love for you to go there. And looks like we only have a minute left.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will
Go ahead,
we will
Melodie.
close our we'll close our quote. We will close our presentation with a quote from Jose Vilson, a math teacher who recently reminded us that we don't teach math, we teach students math. Finally, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And please, again, go to our website, justequations.org, which is right there on the screen, to subscribe to our newsletter and learn more about our work. Thank you again for spending the afternoon with us. Have a great rest of your day.
So thank you both for this presentation and answering the questions. For those of you who are in attendance, and if you didn't have an opportunity to ask your questions or didn't have an opportunity to have your question answered, please feel free to reach out to me and or to complete the evaluation that allows for this webinar that provides you an opportunity to ask the questions, and we'll forward the questions to Melodie and Pam so that we can follow up with you and make sure that your questions are answered for this. So with this, I encourage you 2 things. Make sure you go to our website, and for the recording, the resources that our presenters shared today will be uploaded shortly, by tomorrow at the latest. Also would like to invite you to sign up for the upcoming webinars. The next one will be in 2 weeks on March 11th, still at the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern, on co-requisite support at this time. So again, Melodie, Pamela, thank you so much for your time. And everybody in attendance, thank you so much for your time as well, and your questions, your participation. Much appreciated. So thank you very much.
Thank
Have
you
a great
for
rest
having
of your
us.
day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.